Hello, YouTube. Today, I want to talk about one of the things that worked really well in the Zoom Circus show that goes wrong, which is the faked ceiling leak at the end of my straps act. Now, this is something that I knew I wanted in the show from basically my first image of what my part in the show would be. And it's also something that I was very nervous about because it's outside of my areas of expertise. I don't do stage effects usually. And my partner, Evan, who I rely on for so many things, was also deeply skeptical of the idea that this was going to work at all, right up until it did. Which makes it even more magical that once I had a plan that seemed feasible to me, it did work on the first try. So yeah, I'm going to share my planning and the process here. So the initial idea here was actually that the act was going to be filmed from a single wide angle shot, and that throughout the act you would see drips falling from the top with increasing frequency and intensity until at the end there's just like a sheet of water coming down, obscuring my finale. I notice, rush over, put my face like right up against the camera, and you can see it just like destroying my hair and makeup, and I frantically shout for help from C. And Evan rightly pointed out that this was unreasonable for a technical reason, which is that cameras have a focal length. They have a plane of focus, and that can either be something that's close up like a water drop or something that's far away like a straps act. But short of taking the camera very far away and using a zoom lens to bring those two things relatively sort of closer together from the camera's perspective, there wasn't going to be a good way to get both the water and the act in focus. And when you have something like water, which is at the very least translucent, and it is out of focus, you just can't see it. And in the end, we didn't even try this idea because I moved away from it for a creative reason as well. I used buffering as an opportunity to do a rough draft of my act for the Zoom Circus show that goes wrong. And at the end of buffering, I grabbed the phone camera and took it onto the straps with me in a selfie for my final spin. And as I was choreographing it, I thought, well, this is going to be something that's dorky, but for the purposes of my act and buffering, I think that it works for this act. But as it turned out, it worked a lot better than I thought it would, and it was a lot more popular than I thought it would be. And as a result, I wanted to include it in Zoom Circus Show That Goes Wrong. So problem solved in a way. We don't have this focal distance issue because the camera's going to be in my hand and my arms are short, so I can really only get it that far away. But one technical difficulty solved, but another one created because moving the camera into my hand moved the leak from a very controllable situation behind the camera to like wherever my head happened to be at that moment. And so my first idea was that I needed to build something that I could put at the top of my rig that would, on some kind of delay, start dripping water. And so I was like, okay, maybe I can like get a Ziploc bag and like poke holes in it and tape over it with like a paper towel, and the towel will become inundated and then it'll start dripping. And then as it becomes even more inundated, it will drip faster onto my head. And except the more I thought about that, the more I was like, no, no, that's definitely not gonna work. Because you want to talk about unpredictability? Like, is that paper towel gonna take 2 minutes or 3 minutes or 4 minutes to actually inundate? And also, like, what's the maximum rate with which water drips filtering through a paper towel? Is that actually going to be like fast enough for it to look like I've basically just like shoved my head under a tap and I'm getting completely drenched? Because like the last thing that I would want is like just this slow, boring drip on my head throughout the entire act that then I'm like, oh yeah, there's a bit of a leak. I gotta get a bucket, I guess. Let me do that. I'll be right back. Like, no, that's not drama. So then my next thought was that we could do it in two takes. I could take the sort of selfie spin and then I could come and just have a selfie. And on the other side of my hand would be my partner, Evan, maybe standing on a step stool and pouring water from a pitcher onto my head. And that remained the backup plan because, he's like a foot taller than I am and his arms are super long. So it was at least plausible that we could, in fact, film that without getting him on camera and with it just looking like water was pouring from the ceiling onto my head. And there would be no problem really just drenching me with water. So yay, I like that. Um, but we wouldn't have been able to film it in one shot because the shot while I'm spinning, if he's there, if he's like prepped and ready to go, you're gonna see him flashing by quickly, but nevertheless flashing by. And the shot where I'm being soaked, he needs to be there and ready to go. And I wanted a continuous shot where I'm just spinning and the leak starts to happen and you see it happening on my face. But Evan has a bit of an AeroGarden addiction, and that means that we have things like spare reservoirs and aquarium tubing just lying around the house, not even in use. And so here's what I did. I climbed up to the top of my rig and I attached a piece of aquarium tubing in place where I wanted to be standing for the final shot. I then threw the rest of the aquarium tubing up into our loft where I could attach it to an empty reservoir. When there was water in the reservoir, the entire thing would drain through the aquarium tubing onto my head where I stood on some tarps and some towels underneath it. And this ended up working actually really great because there's a pump that you use to clear the line of all of the air bubbles and create a siphon. And using that, you get these discrete squirts of liquid that can serve either as something that really looks like a leak or as something that warns me that it's about to start. And once the siphon has started, if you don't remove that reservoir, it's just all going to drain right onto the floor and it looks really cool. So the first time that we tried it, we got these two videos. So Evan has just loaded the reservoir into the system and so far it's not doing much. It's all attached. Here we go. I hope. Oh, there it comes. But it's just like, oh, that's so perfect. That's awesome. Now, I wasn't ready to film that day, and by the time I actually finalized my act choreography and my costume and was ready to film. It was about a week later, and much of the water that was in the aquarium tubing line had actually either dripped through it all the way or dried out. So we had to charge the system again. But once we did, it worked absolutely phenomenally, and we got this take, which I ended up using in the show.
I think there's a leak. Yeah, there's definitely a leak. I need to do something about this. See? Help!
Now, I thought the first take was golden, but Evan thought that we had to do at least 2 takes so that I could choose the best one. And you know what? He had a point. But, while my makeup was shockingly water resistant, my hair and my costume were definitely not. So I got to spend 30 minutes blow drying my costume and really just hoping for the best with my hair because how do you hair? Yeah, and we got a second take, and it was pretty dang cool. And here it is.
I think there's a leak. There's definitely a leak. I need to fix this. See, help!
But in the end, I still went with the first one because that moment where I look up and get a face full of water was just perfect. Here it is again. So the other thing that I was really worried about going into it was the cleanup. But as it turned out, that was a total non-issue. The towel soaked up the vast majority of the water and the tarp caught the rest, and I could just mop it up and have done with it. And the night of the show, I ducked into the bathroom while my act video was playing to put my head under a tap and get properly drenched. And that was just like much more straightforward. There was no necessity for improvised plumbing at that stage. So I hope that you guys have enjoyed this take into my forays into amateur stage effects. It certainly was branching out from the kind of things that I usually do. And I would love to know if you had other ideas about how it could be done or how you would do it differently. I have another couple of videos planned about my process and things that are much closer to my wheelhouse and I have a bit more expertise in. So things like making my costume and choreographing the act itself. And so those are going to come up in the next few weeks. But until then, bye for now.